I didn't go looking for another betrayal. Not after the ultrasound I found in the drawer. Not after the crumpled receipt I pulled from his jacket pocket last week. I was done hunting. I was done suspecting. I just needed one thing, my own lab update. Something simple. Something normal. My cardiologist had emailed me earlier about my cholesterol results, and my iPad was dead, sitting uselessly on the charging dock in the kitchen. I walked into our home office in Greenwich. The room smelled of cedar and the faint, lingering scent of his Santal 33. The only light came from the oversized monitor on his desk and the standby light of his MacBook Pro, pulsing softly like a sleeping heartbeat. His laptop was already open. I sat down in his leather Eames chair. It was still warm. Richard must have just left the room to get a glass of water. I told myself it was fine. We had been married for 30 years. We didn't have passwords. We didn't have walls. Or at least I thought we didn't. I touched the trackpad. The screen woke up instantly. It didn't look guilty. It didn't look like a crime scene. It looked clinical. There were no illicit texts popping up. No dating apps. Just a clean, sterile login page that had refreshed automatically. Genosis Genetic Labs patient portal. I stared at it. I told myself it was nothing. Richard was 65. He had checkups. Maybe he was worried about his prostate. Maybe he was checking my results for me because he was the attentive husband everyone envied. Just close it, Alana, I whispered to the empty room. Check your email and go to bed. But my hand didn't listen. My hand moved before my brain could stop it. The cursor hovered over the navigation bar, trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from a sudden magnetic pull toward the truth. I clicked the tab labeled Recent Uploads. The page loaded with the speed of a fiber optic connection paid for by my family trust. One file sat at the top of the list, flagged with a bright yellow New icon. Document type, Prenatal Screening Panel, NIPT. Date of service, October 14th. The air in the room seemed to vanish. My lungs locked. I wasn't looking at a prostate exam. I wasn't looking at cholesterol numbers. I clicked the PDF. It opened in high definition, the black text sharp against the white background. I didn't read the medical jargon. I didn't look at the chromosome analysis. My eyes went straight to the summary box in the top right corner. Gestational age 13 weeks 4 days. Estimated due date July 12th. July 12th. I stared at the date until the numbers blurred. July 12th. I did the math instantly. It's a curse of being a businesswoman. You always do the math. If the due date is July 12th, conception was in mid-October. Mid-October. I closed my eyes and the memory hit me like a physical blow. Mid-October. I was in London, closing the acquisition of the Kensington property. I was gone for 10 days. Richard had stayed behind in New York. He said he had board meetings. He said he missed me. I opened my eyes and looked at the screen again. I am 62 years old. I went through menopause 15 years ago. My womb is a retired archive, not a nursery. And in that silent, sterile room, bathed in the blue glow of a screen that cost more than most people's cars, I understood something terrifying. That date wasn't mine. It never was. The receipt I found last week, the one with the credit card digits ending in 4491, proved he paid for something. But this screen? This screen proved he was making a life. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the laptop across the room. I sat perfectly still, listening to the hum of the hard drive, while the realization settled over me like a shroud. I wasn't just a wife who had been cheated on. I was the financier of another woman's future, and I needed to know who she was. The screen didn't flicker. The pixels didn't bleed red. The monitor simply continued to emit its soft, high-definition blue light, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the silent air of our home office. That was the most terrifying part of it. The interface was so innocent. It was a masterpiece of modern web design. Crisp, sans-serif fonts, a calming color palette of teal and slate gray, a polite greeting in the top right corner that read, "Welcome back." It looked exactly like what it was supposed to be. A portal for saving lives, for monitoring health, for the miracles of modern science. It didn't look like a weapon that had just eviscerated my marriage. I sat there, my hand frozen on the mouse, staring at the portal's dashboard. Usually, betrayal is messy. It's a smudge of lipstick on a collar. It's a frantic, deleted text message full of misspellings and desperate emojis. It's the smell of cheap perfume clinging to a jacket. Those are the dirty, chaotic artifacts of an affair. But this was administrative. This was bureaucratic. Richard hadn't just cheated on me, he had managed the affair with the same organizational efficiency he applied to his hedge fund. He had created a file, he had set up a user profile, he had authorized medical procedures, he had turned his infidelity into a project with a timeline, a budget, and a paper trail. I felt a wave of nausea roll through me, not from the shock anymore, but from the sheer indignity of it. He had brought his work ethic into his betrayal. I took a breath, forcing the oxygen into my lungs. The initial paralysis of the shock was beginning to fade, replaced by a cold, vibrating clarity. It was a sensation I knew well from the boardroom. It was the feeling of analyzing a failing investment, looking for the leak in the balance sheet. Don't cry, I commanded myself. Analyze. If the interface was this clean, it meant he felt safe, he felt arrogant, and arrogant men always leave a door unlocked. I moved the cursor away from the damning PDF of the pregnancy test. I needed more than a date. A date is a tragedy, a name is a target. I navigated back to the main dashboard. The UI was smooth, responsive. I clicked on the tab labeled Patient Profile. The screen loaded instantly. Name, protected user, number 8842. DOB. I let out a short, dry laugh. Of course. He was careful. He had used the lab's VIP privacy protocol, a service designed for celebrities and politicians who didn't want the tabloids to know they were getting blood work done. There was no name, no address, just a ghost in the machine. But even ghosts have to pay the toll. I remembered the receipt I had found in his pocket last week, the one he had dismissed so casually while pouring himself a scotch. Just a client dinner. Alana, boring steakhouse in Brooklyn. Don't worry about it. I had worried about it. I had worried enough to memorize the last 4 digits of the card he used, printed faintly at the bottom of that thermal paper. 4491. I moved the mouse to the tab on the far left, billing and insurance. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm against the silence of the house. This was the moment. If he had used cash, or a shell company, or a prepaid card, I would be at a dead end. I would be left with a due date and a ghost. But Richard was a creature of habit, and he was a man who loved his points, his miles, his status. I clicked the tab, the page refreshed, the interface remained aggressively clean, no clutter, just a simple table of transactions. Date, October 14th. Service, NFT panel and cord blood banking reservation amount, $2,400. Status, paid. And there in the column labeled payment method was the smoking gun. It wasn't a name. It was something better. It was a number that bridged the gap between the dinner in Brooklyn and the baby in this portal. Visa ending in 4491. I stared at the number. The sterile white light of the screen seemed to sharpen, etching the digits into my retinas. 4491. The same card. The same man. A dark, cold satisfaction settled in my chest, displacing the pain for a brief, glorious second. It was the satisfaction of the puzzle piece clicking into place. He thought he had scrubbed the crime scene. He thought he had redacted the names and hidden the evidence behind a secure login. But he had been lazy. He had used the same card to buy her a steak dinner that he used to buy her a prenatal screening. He had treated his mistress and his unborn child as line items on the same expense report. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. Victims cry, survivors collect evidence. I raised the phone and framed the shot. I made sure to capture the welcome back header, the timestamp of the login, and that damning credit card number. Click. The screen captured the image. The portal still looked clean. It still looked professional. But now it was mine. I had the when, July 12th. I had the how, Visa 4491. Now I just needed the who. And I knew exactly where that credit card had been used last. I closed the laptop lid. The room plunged back into darkness, but I could see clearly now. I wasn't going back to sleep. I had shopping to do. The cursor hovered over the PDF icon. It was a small generic graphic, a little red and white square that looked harmless. It was the kind of icon I clicked a dozen times a day, for contracts, for invoices, for architectural blueprints. But this file felt heavy. It felt radioactive. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen down the hall. I could hear the blood rushing in my own ears, a whooshing sound that grew louder with every second I hesitated. Click. The sound of the mouse was sharp, like a twig snapping in a dead forest. The screen flashed white for a fraction of a second, and then the document loaded. It wasn't a blurry scan or a hasty photo. It was a pristine, digital native medical report. The header was bold and authoritative. Genosis Labs, prenatal screening panel, NIPT. I didn't read it top to bottom. I didn't care about the patient ID number or the barcode at the top. My eyes, trained by decades of scanning legal briefs for loopholes, flew instantly to the data table in the center of the page. There were numbers. Cold, hard, irrefutable numbers. Gestational age, 13 weeks, 4 days. Fetal heart rate, 150 BPM. I stopped breathing. I literally forgot how to inhale. 150 beats per minute. A heartbeat. A strong, rapid, thriving heartbeat was pulsing through this document. It was a ghost rhythm echoing in my silent, childless home. I looked down at my own hands resting on the desk. They were manicured, aging, elegant hands. Hands that had signed multi-million-dollar deals. Hands that had held wine glasses and steering wheels and diamond tennis bracelets. But they were not hands that had held a positive pregnancy test in 30 years. I am 62. My body closed that factory deeply and permanently over a decade ago. The cognitive dissonance was physically painful, like a spike driven between my eyes. I stared at the screen, forcing myself to process the impossible. 13 weeks. I closed my eyes and let the business brain, the part of me that is a shark, not a wife, take over. I needed to do the math. I needed to audit this timeline, July due date, -9 months, or count back 13 weeks from today. The calendar in my head scrolled backward, December, November, October. Mid-October. My eyes snapped open. The nausea hit me then, a cold, oily wave rising from my stomach. Mid-October. I knew exactly where I was in mid-October. I was in London, staying at a hotel in Mayfair, negotiating the final terms of the Kensington acquisition. I remembered the rain against the window. I remembered the endless conference calls. And I remembered calling Richard. I remembered his voice on the phone, warm and reassuring. He had told me he was buried in work. He had told me the house felt empty without me. He had told me he was spending his nights at the office, eating takeout and reviewing portfolios. He was reviewing portfolios, I thought, a bitter bile rising in my throat. He wasn't working. He was creating this. He was with her. While I was crossing the Atlantic to secure our retirement, he was in New York, securing his legacy with someone else. I looked back at the screen. The report listed the risk factors. Trisomy 21. Low risk. Trisomy 18, low risk. Everything was low risk. Everything was healthy. Everything was perfect. A dark, twisted sense of admiration curled in my gut. It was almost impressive, the audacity of it, the sheer, unadulterated arrogance. He had kept this file here, on the shared cloud, because he didn't view it as a bomb. He viewed it as an asset. He wasn't just sleeping with her. This wasn't a mistake. You don't get to 13 weeks by accident. You get to 13 weeks by choice. You get to 13 weeks by doctor's appointments, by vitamins, by planning. This file proved that he wasn't just cheating on me. He was building a parallel life. He was constructing a nursery on the foundation of my ignorance. I reached out and touched the screen, my fingertip resting on the line that said fetal sex, male. A son. He had always wanted a son. We never had one. The pain finally cracked through the shock. It wasn't a sharp pain. It was a dull, heavy, crushing sensation, as if the roof of the house had quietly collapsed on top of me. He was giving a stranger the one thing I couldn't give him. But then the shark swam back to the surface. I looked at the upload time in the metadata again. He had uploaded this himself. He had saved it. He cherished it. Good, I thought, the tears drying instantly on my lashes before they could fall. Save it, Richard. Keep it safe. Because this file that shouldn't exist, this file that documented the healthy heartbeat of his betrayal, was no longer just a medical report. It was Exhibit A. I didn't delete it. I didn't close the window in a panic. I sat there for a long moment, letting the blue light wash over my face, memorizing the shape of my enemy. The date wasn't mine. The baby wasn't mine. But the consequences? Those would be entirely mine to distribute. July 12th. The date pulsed on the screen like a warning light. It wasn't a holiday. It wasn't a birthday. It was a deadline. I stared at it until the numbers seemed to detach from the white background and float in front of my eyes. July 12th. My body went completely still. It wasn't the stillness of peace, it was the stillness of a prey animal that realizes the predator is already in the room. The blood seemed to drain out of my extremities, leaving my fingers and toes feeling icy and numb, while a hot, suffocating pressure built up behind my eyes. I didn't cry. Tears are a reaction to sadness, and I wasn't sad yet. I was in a state of suspended animation, trapped between the life I thought I had 5 minutes ago and the wreckage I was sitting in now. July 12th. The business part of my brain, the part that had navigated hostile takeovers and negotiated severance packages, kicked into gear automatically. It bypassed my broken heart and went straight for the logic. It demanded the math, calculation. A standard pregnancy is 40 weeks. If the due date is July 12th, you count back. You subtract the months. You find the origin point. June, May, April, March, February, January, December, November, October, mid-October. The timeline snapped into focus with the sharpness of a guillotine blade. Mid-October, specifically the week of the 14th. I knew exactly where I was the week of October 14th. I didn't need to check my calendar. I didn't need to check my flight logs. I remembered it vividly because it was the week I had flown to Europe to handle the crisis with our overseas investors. I remembered the cold rain in London. I remembered the lonely room service dinners. I remembered calling Richard every night, exhausted, seeking his voice as my anchor. "I miss you, Alana," he had said. "The house is too quiet without you. I'm just going to stay in and read." A cold, dark laugh bubbled up in my throat, but it died before it reached my lips. He wasn't reading, he wasn't missing me, he wasn't staying in. While I was fighting to protect our assets across the ocean, he was here in New York, planting the seeds of my replacement. He was busy creating a life that had absolutely nothing to do with me. I looked down at myself. I looked at my body. I am 62 years old. My body retired from the business of creation a long time ago. Nature had closed that door, locked it, and thrown away the key. There was no miracle here. There was no medical anomaly. That date wasn't mine. It couldn't be mine. The realization didn't hit me all at once. It seeped in, cold and toxic. It wasn't just that he had slept with someone else. A one-night stand is a betrayal of the body. This was a betrayal of the soul. He had created a future. A due date isn't just a day on a calendar, it's a promise, it's a commitment to 18 years of parenting, it's college tuitions, it's graduations, it's a legacy. Richard was 65. We were supposed to be winding down. We were supposed to be planning trips to the Amalfi Coast and arguing about which charity to leave our estate to. Instead, he was starting over. He was going to be a father again. And by definition, that meant he was preparing to stop being my husband. You don't build a nursery for a new family while keeping the old wife in the penthouse. The math doesn't work. One variable has to be eliminated. Me. I looked back at the screen, at the clean interface, at the low-risk results. A strange, twisted sense of vindication began to rise through the numbness. It was the grim satisfaction of a mathematician who finally balances a complex equation. He thought he was so clever. He thought he could compartmentalize his life, keeping his wife box separate from his mistress box. But he was arrogant. He was sloppy. He had documented his own infidelity. He had time-stamped his lies. He had given me the one thing a lawyer can't argue against: biology. He could lie about the texts. He could lie about the dinners. He could say they were just friends. But he couldn't lie about a due date. He couldn't lie about a fetus that was 13 weeks old when I was 3,000 miles away. I reached out and traced the date on the screen with a trembling finger. July 12th. It wasn't my due date, but it was my expiration date. Or at least that's what he thought. He thought he was replacing me. He thought I would fade away quietly, the old wife making room for the new mother. I sat back in the leather chair, the leather creaking in the silence. The shock was receding, replaced by a cold, hard resolve that felt like steel running down my spine. No, I whispered to the empty room. The date wasn't mine. The baby wasn't mine. But the ending of this story? That was going to be entirely mine. The due date was a punch to the gut. It was emotional. It was visceral. It was a biological fact that screamed betrayal. But emotions can be argued with. Emotions can be gaslit. Richard could claim it was a glitch. He could claim the lab made a clerical error, that files got crossed, that this July 12th belonged to some stranger's file that accidentally merged with his account. I could hear his voice in my head already, smooth and reassuring. Alana, darling, you're overreacting. It's a computer bug. I'll call IT in the morning. I needed to silence that voice before it even started speaking. I didn't just need the what. I needed the how. I needed the fingerprints. In the digital world, fingerprints don't look like swirls of oil and skin cells. They look like metadata. I took a deep breath, pushing the nausea down into the pit of my stomach. I sat up straighter in the leather chair. The weeping wife was gone. The auditor had arrived. I moved the cursor over the PDF file name. I didn't open it again. I had seen enough of the happy, healthy fetus. Instead, I right-clicked. Properties. Details. A new window popped up, a small gray box filled with lines of text that most people ignore. To the average person, it's just gibberish. To someone who has spent 40 years catching contractors padding their invoices and lawyers burying clauses in fine print, it is the only scripture that matters. File created, October 14th, 2024, 09:04 a.m. October 15th through 15 a.m. My eyes locked onto the second timestamp, 10 a.m. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I remembered the night of October 15th perfectly. I had just returned from London. I was jet-lagged, exhausted, wrapped in silk sheets, trying to reconnect with my husband. Richard had been restless. He had kissed my forehead, his lips cool and dry. "I can't sleep," he had whispered, playing the part of the tortured insomniac. "I'm going to go down to the study and read for a bit. You sleep, my love. I don't want to wake you." I had felt so guilty. I had felt so lucky to have a husband who was considerate enough to leave the room so I could rest. But he hadn't gone down to read a book. He had come down here, to this computer, to modify this file. At 2:15 a.m., while I was sleeping upstairs believing I was safe in my marriage, he was sitting in this chair, staring at the sonogram of his mistress's baby. He wasn't working. He was gloating. He was saving the file to his private cloud, organizing his double life while the rest of the house slept. I felt a flash of pure, white-hot rage, but it was quickly replaced by a dark, triumphant satisfaction. Got you. The timestamp proved intent. You don't accidentally access a prenatal file at 2:15 a.m. You don't glitch into a saved folder in the middle of the night. This was an act of devotion. But I wasn't done. I scrolled down to the source section. Upload origin IP 192.168.1.50. Static. I knew that IP address. I didn't even need to look it up. I pay the bills for the high-speed business fiber line installed in this house. That was the static IP for the secure server in this very room. It wasn't uploaded from a hacked account in Russia. It wasn't uploaded from a public Wi-Fi at Starbucks. It was uploaded from the desk I was sitting at. And then, the final nail in the coffin, the field labeled User Action Log. View count 42 times. He had opened this file 42 times in the last 3 weeks. He wasn't just hiding it, he was obsessed with it. He was looking at it over his morning coffee. He was looking at it before bed. He was looking at it the way a man looks at his most prized possession. He had never looked at our wedding photos 42 times. The realization settled over me, heavy and absolute. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a man who was deeply excitedly involved in the process of replacing me. I looked at the screen, the timestamp, the IP address, the view count. These weren't just data points. They were the coordinates of his betrayal. A grim smile touched my lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a poker player who just saw her opponent's cards in the reflection of his sunglasses. He thought he was invisible. He thought he was a ghost moving through the machine. But he forgot that machines don't lie. Men do. "You left your fingerprints everywhere, Richard," I whispered to the silent screen. I reached for my phone again. I didn't just photograph the screen this time. I recorded a video, scrolling slowly through the metadata, capturing the timestamp, the IP, the view count. I wanted the motion. I wanted the proof that this was a live file, not a Photoshop job. I saved the video to the secure, hidden folder. The metadata told me he was guilty. It told me he was obsessed. But it still didn't give me the one thing I needed to destroy him properly. It didn't give me her face. I closed the properties window. The clean portal stared back at me. I had the time. I had the location. Now I needed the identity. And I knew exactly where to find it. I moved my mouse toward the tab labeled Billing. The numbers had told the truth. Now I needed the money to tell me the name. The metadata had given me the timeline, it had given me the proof of his obsession. But as I stared at the screen, the numbers began to lose their power. Knowing when is painful. Knowing who is essential. The human brain isn't wired to be jealous of a statistic. You can't hate a timestamp. You can't scream at an IP address. Rage needs a target. It needs a face. It needs a name to attach to the betrayal, a focal point for all the humiliation burning through my veins. I navigated away from the cold, hard logic of the file properties and back to the main dashboard of the portal. My hand was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at the top left corner of the screen, where the patient's name should be. Patient name, restricted access ID 8842 Gen VIP. I let out a harsh, jagged breath. Of course. Richard hadn't just paid for a test, he had paid for anonymity. He had utilized the lab's executive privacy tier, a feature designed for celebrities, high-profile politicians, and apparently unfaithful husbands who wanted to hide their dirty laundry behind a firewall. There was no name, no address, no date of birth, just a sterile, gray placeholder where her identity should be. I felt a fresh wave of nausea, but this time it was mixed with a bitter, poisonous irony. Richard was so careless with me, leaving his laptop open, leaving receipts in his pockets. Yet he was meticulously careful with her. He had built a digital fortress around this woman. He was protecting her, he was shielding her from the world, and most specifically, he was shielding her from me. I imagined her. Was she young? Was she one of his interns? Was she someone I knew? The thought made my skin crawl. Every dinner party we had hosted in the last 3 months replayed in my mind. Every woman who had laughed too hard at his jokes, every friend who had hugged him a little too long. Is it you? I thought, staring at the gray box, or you? The anonymity was a weapon. It made everyone a suspect. It turned my entire life into a lineup. I clicked on the profile tab, hoping for a slip-up. Maybe an emergency contact, maybe a phone number entered in haste. The page loaded, emergency contact, self, phone redacted, email redacted, nothing. He had scrubbed it clean. It was a ghost profile for a ghost woman carrying a ghost child. For a moment, I felt defeated. The system was designed to keep people like me out. It was designed to protect the patient's privacy at all costs, regardless of the moral wreckage involved. But then the business brain kicked in again. The part of me that had audited companies for decades, looking for the bodies buried in the spreadsheets. You can hide a name. You can redact a phone number. You can encrypt an email address, but you cannot hide the money. The medical industry runs on a very simple engine: payment. Labs don't run tests for free. They don't store data for ghosts. Someone has to pay the bill, and that payment has to be processed through a clearinghouse. And to process a payment, you need verified billing information. You need a cardholder name. You need a billing address. You cannot use a restricted access ID to pay a Visa bill. A cold, sharp smile touched my lips. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was the baring of teeth. Richard thought he had covered his tracks. He thought the privacy filter was a concrete wall. But he forgot that every wall has a service entrance. He had focused so hard on hiding the medical data that he might have gotten lazy with the financial data. I moved the cursor. It felt heavy, like I was pushing a boulder, but I dragged it across the screen, past test results, past appointments, past genetic counseling. I hovered over the tab on the far right. Billing and insurance. My finger paused on the mouse. This was it. If he used cash, I was dead in the water. If he used a prepaid burner card, I was blind. But Richard was a creature of comfort. He liked his points. He liked his miles. And more importantly, he was arrogant. He didn't think I would ever find this portal, so why would he bother using a burner card? He probably thought he was safe because the transaction description on the bank statement would just say, medical services. He probably thought I would never see the itemized receipt inside the portal. Let's see who you are, I whispered to the silence. I clicked the tab. The screen flashed white, the loading circle spinning for a tormenting 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. The billing page resolved. And there, stripped of all the privacy filters, stripped of the restricted access warnings, was the financial truth. I didn't see a face. Not yet. But I saw something that echoed a secret I had already uncovered, a credit card number. And suddenly I wasn't looking at a ghost anymore. I was looking at a trail. The billing page didn't scream. It didn't flash red warning lights. It simply presented the facts in a neat, unassuming font, black text on a white background, stripped of all the emotional violence it contained. Transaction date October 14, 2024. Service rendered, comprehensive prenatal panel and VIP privacy surcharge. Total amount $2,850. And then the line that stopped my heart. Payment method, Visa, ending in 4491. I stared at the 4 digits. 4491. They vibrated on the screen, burning themselves into my retinas. For a second, the room spun. The silence of the Greenwich house was replaced by a rushing sound in my ears like the roar of an approaching train. 4491. I didn't need to look it up. I didn't need to check his wallet. The number echoed in my memory with the clarity of a church bell. It was the echo of a receipt. My hand moved instinctively to the top drawer of the mahogany desk, the junk drawer, where I threw old batteries, paper clips, and things I wasn't quite ready to throw away. I pulled it open. There, buried under a stack of old business cards, was a small, crumpled ball of thermal paper. I had found it 10 days ago. It was wadded up in the pocket of his charcoal suit jacket, the one he wore when he told me he was having a boring client dinner at a steakhouse in the city. I had almost thrown it out before the laundry service came, but something, intuition, paranoia, or perhaps the ghost of the woman I used to be, had made me smooth it out. I smoothed it out again now. The paper was faded, the ink barely legible, but the bottom line was clear. Date, October 10th. Total, $482. Card Visa 4491. I placed the wrinkled slip of paper against the glowing screen. The physical world met the digital world. The lie met the truth. 4491. The numbers aligned perfectly. 2 jagged shards of glass fitting together to form a weapon. A cold, dark sensation washed over me. It wasn't pain anymore. It was validation. It was the sickening, triumphant feeling of being right. For 10 days, I had told myself I was crazy. I had told myself that the receipt was just a dinner, that the distance in his eyes was just stress, that the client was real. I had gaslit myself to keep the peace, to keep the illusion of my 30-year marriage alive. But the numbers didn't lie. He wasn't using our joint Amex. He wasn't using the corporate card. He had opened a separate account, a secret financial vein, specifically to fund this life. This card, ending in 4491, was the lifeline of his betrayal. It paid for the steak dinner where he likely held her hand across the table. It paid for the prenatal test that confirmed he had impregnated her. It probably paid for the hotel rooms, the gifts, the silence. I looked at the receipt again. $482 for dinner. I looked at the screen. $2,850 for the baby. He was investing heavily. This wasn't a cheap fling. This was a second mortgage on his soul. A dry, humorless laugh escaped my lips. It was a terrifying sound in the empty room. Richard always prided himself on his financial acumen. Diversify your assets, Alana, he would say. Never put all your capital in one venture. He was diversifying, all right? He was hedging his bets against his aging wife with a younger, fertile investment. I felt a sudden surge of power. It rushed through my veins, displacing the shock. He thought he was safe because he hid her name. He thought he was safe because he used a privacy portal. But he had made the classic mistake of the arrogant man. He left a paper trail. He had used the same credit card for the sin and the cover-up. I picked up my phone. My hands were rock steady now. The trembling was gone. I wasn't a victim looking at a disaster. I was a prosecutor looking at Exhibit B. I took a photo. I framed it carefully, the glowing screen with the transaction details in the background, the crumpled receipt held in my hand in the foreground. The number 4491 appeared twice in the frame, a damning duet. Click. The image was saved. I looked at the receipt one last time before dropping it back into the drawer. It wasn't just trash anymore. It was a map. The credit card statement for Visa 4491 would tell me everything. It would tell me where he shopped, where he slept, and most importantly, it would tell me where he was building this new nursery. I didn't have the statement yet, but I knew exactly how to get it. I closed the billing tab. I had what I came for. The echo had turned into a scream. The portal gave me the when. The receipt gave me the how. Now, I just had to wait for him to make one more purchase. Just one, and then I would have the who. I sat back in the darkness, the blue light of the monitor illuminating a face that no longer looked like a wife. It looked like a judge. The truth is a volatile substance. If you leave it exposed to the air for too long, it evaporates, or worse, it gets deleted. I looked at the screen, at the due date, the credit card number, the timestamps. Right now, this was evidence. But the moment I closed this browser, it would become nothing more than a memory. And memories can be gaslit. Memories can be questioned. Richard could look me in the eye and tell me I was hallucinating, that I was tired, that I was projecting my insecurities onto a blank screen. I needed to make this bulletproof. I picked up my phone again. The silence in the room was absolute, amplified by the pounding of my own pulse in my ears. I didn't just take a photo. I turned on the video camera. I started recording. I narrated nothing. I let the image speak for itself. I slowly panned the camera across the monitor, capturing the Genosis Labs header to establish location. I zoomed in on the 13 weeks, 4 days text to establish the timeline. I moved down to the billing section, letting the camera focus on Visa 4491 until the numbers were sharp and undeniable. I pulled the physical receipt from the desk and held it up against the screen, recording the match. Digital lie. Physical truth. I recorded the metadata window, the login time at 2:15 a.m. Got you, I mouthed, no sound coming out. I stopped the recording. Then I took screenshots. Dozens of them. I captured every tab, every submenu, every single pixel of his betrayal. But having the photos on my phone wasn't enough. Richard knew my passcode. He often borrowed my phone to check the weather or call a driver. If he saw these photos in my camera roll, the war would start before I was ready. And I wasn't ready to fight yet. I was still loading the gun. I opened my private email app, a secure, encrypted account I used for high-level contract negotiations, one that Richard didn't even know existed. I attached the files. The upload bar moved agonizingly slow. Sending, sent. I didn't stop there. I created a new folder in my private cloud drive. I typed the name with steady thumbs. Folder name, Project July. I dropped the photos and videos inside. Then I deleted them from my phone's camera roll. I went to the recently deleted folder and emptied that too. Scorched earth. Now, the digital evidence was safe in a vault he couldn't touch. But the crime scene, his laptop, was still hot. I looked at the browser history. 9 p.m., Genosis patient portal. Genosis login. If he woke up tomorrow and checked his history, he would see that someone had accessed the portal at 9 p.m. while he was downstairs watching the news. He would know. I moved the mouse to the History tab. I didn't click Clear All. That would be suspicious. Richard never cleared his history. He was too arrogant to think he needed to. If the history was suddenly empty, it would be a red flag. I selected only the entries from the last hour. Select, delete. The lines vanished. The gap closed up. The history now showed his last activity from 5 p.m., checking stock prices, and then nothing until tomorrow morning. Perfect. I closed the tab. I closed the browser. I returned the desktop to exactly how I found it. Then, I looked at the physical space. My reading glasses were on the desk. I picked them up. The coaster under my tea mug had shifted slightly. I moved it back. The leather chair. I had adjusted the height lever when I sat down. I lowered it back down, estimating the position Richard kept it in. And finally, the fingerprints. I looked at the trackpad and the keyboard. The natural oils from my fingertips were invisible to the naked eye. But I wasn't taking chances. I took the hem of my silk sleeve and gently wiped the spacebar. I wiped the trackpad. I wiped the polished aluminum edge of the laptop where my wrists had rested. It was a chillingly intimate act. I was cleaning my husband's computer not to care for him, but to erase myself from his secret world. I stood up. The room looked exactly as it had 20 minutes ago. The amber light of the desk lamp cast the same warm shadows. The smell of cedar was still in the air. But everything had changed. I looked down at the sleeping computer one last time. A strange, cold sensation filled my chest. It wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was the thrill of the superior strategist. He thought he was the player. He thought he was moving pieces around the board, hiding pawns and protecting his king. He didn't realize that I had just walked by, memorized the board, and stolen his rulebook. I turned off the desk lamp. The room plunged into darkness. "Sleep tight, Richard," I whispered into the void. I walked out of the office and closed the door without making a sound. The rumble of the garage door opening vibrated through the floorboards of the library. It was a low, mechanical growl, a sound that, for 30 years, had signaled safety. It meant the day was over. It meant my partner was home. Tonight, it sounded like the breach of a perimeter. I had exactly 90 seconds before he walked through the door. My heart, which had been beating with the cold precision of a predator while I scraped data from his laptop, suddenly stuttered. This was the hardest part. Finding the evidence was just research. Facing him, that was performance art. I stood up and walked to the window. I caught my reflection in the darkened glass. My face was pale, the blood drained away by the shock of the last hour, but my eyes were dry. I didn't look like a weeping victim. I looked like a statue carved from ice. "Breathe, Alana," I whispered to the glass. "You are not a wife tonight. You are a vault." I sat back down in the armchair, picked up a heavy leather-bound book from the side table, and placed it on my lap. I didn't open it. I just needed a prop. I needed to look like a woman whose biggest worry was the plot twist in a novel, not the plot twist in her marriage. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Heavy, confident, the stride of a man who believes he owns the ground he walks on. "Alana?" His voice boomed, rich and familiar. "Are you still up?" I forced the muscles of my face into a smile. It felt tight, unnatural, like a mask that didn't quite fit. "In here, Richard." The heavy oak doors creaked open. He stood there, framed by the warm light of the hallway. He looked exhausted. His tie was loosened, the top button of his dress shirt undone, his jacket slung casually over one shoulder. He looked handsome in that rugged, weary way that had charmed investors and voters for decades. But now, looking at him through the lens of the last hour, I saw the cracks in the portrait. I saw the slight flush in his cheeks, not from the cold autumn wind, but from the adrenaline of a double life. I saw the way his hair was just a fraction too messy, as if fingers had run through it recently. And then he leaned down to kiss my cheek. I held my breath, but I couldn't stop the scent from hitting me. It wasn't just the smell of the city or his usual cologne. Underneath the musk and the starch of his collar, there was something else. Faint, powdery, sweet, like vanilla and cocoa butter. It wasn't my perfume. I haven't worn vanilla since the 90s. "I'm sorry I'm late," he sighed, straightening up and rubbing his temples. "The board meeting ran over. The new merger is a nightmare. I've been shouting at lawyers for 4 hours." I watched him lie. It was mesmerizing. He didn't stutter. He didn't blink. The lie rolled off his tongue with the smoothness of polished glass. He actually believed his own performance. "Poor thing," I said, my voice steady, betraying nothing of the scream trapped in my throat. "Did you at least manage to eat?" "Just a sandwich in the conference room. Stale bread, cold ham. Terrible." "Liar," I thought, the word echoing in my skull. "You ate steak. You spent nearly $500 on a romantic dinner in Brooklyn. I have the receipt in my drawer. I have the credit card number on your mistress's prenatal bill." But I didn't say that. The shark in my brain told me to wait. If I confronted him now, he would deny it. He would gaslight me. He would delete the files. "Let me pour you a drink," I said, standing up. "You look like you need to unwind." "You're an angel," he groaned, collapsing onto the sofa. I walked to the bar cart. My back was turned to him. I could hear him shifting on the cushions, getting comfortable in the house my family's money had helped build, resting from the hard work of creating a second family. My hands shook as I picked up the crystal decanter. Just once. I poured the amber liquid into the glass, listening to the glug-glug-glug sound. I wanted to throw the glass at the wall. I wanted to turn around and scream, "July 12th," in his face until he broke. But I didn't. I took a deep breath, inhaling the cold reality of my new life. Screaming gives away your power, silence hoarding it. I walked back and handed him the glass. Our fingers brushed. His skin was warm, alive, pulsing with the blood of a man who felt loved and secure. My hand was ice cold. "Thank you, darling," he said, taking a long sip. He looked up at me with those blue eyes that used to be my entire world. "You know, driving home tonight, I was just thinking how lucky I am. This house. You. I don't know what I'd do without you, Alana." It was a line he had used 1,000 times, but tonight I heard the subtext. I don't know what I'd do without your stability. Without your image to hide behind. Without your blindness. You'll never have to find out, I lied back, my smile reaching my eyes just enough to sell it. He finished the drink in one gulp and stood up, stretching his arms. I'm gonna grab a shower, wash the day off. Go ahead, sitting back down and picking up my book. I'll be up in a minute. I watched him walk out of the room. He was going to shower. He was going to scrub his skin with rough soap. He thought the water would wash away the vanilla scent. He thought the steam would evaporate the guilt. Go ahead, Richard, I thought, watching his shadow disappear into the hall. Wash all you want. You can scrub the perfume off your neck. You can burn the receipts. But you can't wash away a metadata timestamp. You can't scrub away the view count on that file. He walked upstairs thinking he was the king of the castle, safely guarded by his loyal queen. He had no idea that while he was pouring a drink, the queen had already locked the gates and lit the match. The room fell silent again. I looked down at the book in my lap. I hadn't read a single word. The investigation was over. The trial was about to begin. 48 hours. That is how long I lived in the gray zone between knowing the truth and acting on it. For 2 agonizing days, I played the role of the oblivious wife with the precision of a stage actor. I poured his coffee in the morning. I asked about his meetings. I signed the checks for the landscapers and the housekeeper, maintaining the pristine ecosystem of a life that had already rotted from the inside out. He didn't notice a thing. That was the most insulting part. He was so consumed by the thrill of his secret creation, that July 12th due date, that he didn't see the shark circling in his own kitchen. He looked at me, but he didn't see me. He saw a fixture. He saw a piece of furniture that paid the bills. But mistakes happen when you get comfortable. And Richard was getting very, very comfortable. It was Thursday morning. The air in the foyer was sharp with the tension of a rushed departure. Richard was late for a breakfast with a donor, or so the calendar claimed. He was frantic, patting down his pockets, spinning in circles near the front door. "Alana!" he shouted, his voice tight with irritation. "Have you seen my fountain pen, the black one? I need it for the signing." I walked out of the kitchen, holding a ceramic mug of tea, my pulse steady. "Check your gray overcoat, Richard. You wore it yesterday when you went to wherever you went." He froze for a millisecond, then grabbed the heavy wool coat from the rack. He plunged his hand into the deep pocket, rummaging around. "Got it," he exhaled, pulling out the pen. "You're a lifesaver, truly." He leaned in and gave me a quick, distracted peck on the cheek. He smelled of soap and lies. "Don't wait up tonight. Long day." "I won't," I said softly. He turned and rushed out the door. The heavy wood slammed shut, the latch clicking with a sound of finality. I stood in the silence of the foyer, listening to his car engine roar to life and fade down the driveway. He was gone, but he had left something behind. In his haste to retrieve the pen, he hadn't noticed that he had dislodged something else from that pocket. A small, rectangular slip of white paper had fluttered out, dancing on the air current before settling softly onto the Persian rug. It lay there, stark white against the deep red wool. I stared at it. It wasn't the thin, thermal paper of a restaurant receipt. It looked thicker, crisper. I walked over to it. I didn't rush. I moved with the slow, deliberate gravity of a judge walking to the bench. I knelt down and picked it up. The paper was fresh. The ink was dark and sharp. It had been printed yesterday afternoon at 4:32 p.m. Store, The Gilded Crib. Location, Madison Avenue, NY. The breath hissed out of my lungs. I wasn't looking at a dinner bill. I wasn't looking at a hotel charge. I was looking at a nest. I read the itemized list, and each line felt like a physical blow. Item: hand-carved walnut crib, European import. Item: organic cashmere blanket cream. Item: expedited handling fee. Total: $6,200. $6,000. He had spent $6,000 on a bed for a child that wasn't even born yet. A child that wasn't mine. I looked around my silent, immaculate foyer. We had never bought a crib. We had never discussed cashmere blankets. That part of our life had been a closed book, a quiet tragedy we agreed never to read aloud. But he had opened it for someone else. The pain was searing, hot and immediate, but then the vindication, kicked in. He was stupid. He was so desperate to play the doting father, to build this fantasy nursery, that he had gotten sloppy. I looked at the bottom of the receipt. The delivery address wasn't listed. He couldn't have a $6,000 crib delivered to a mistress's apartment. Perhaps she had roommates or a doorman who talked, and he certainly couldn't have it delivered here. Delivery method, customer pickup. Status, order ready. Friday, October 28th. After 12 p.m., tomorrow, noon. A cold electric energy shot through my spine, straightening my posture. The portal had given me the when, the abstract date of July 12th. But this receipt gave me the where. I didn't need to hack a database. I didn't need to hire a private investigator to trail his car. I didn't need to guess what she looked like. Tomorrow at noon, someone was going to walk into that high-end boutique on Madison Avenue to pick up a walnut crib paid for with my husband's secret credit card. Maybe it would be Richard. Maybe it would be her. It didn't matter, because I was going to be there to hold the door for them. I folded the receipt carefully, running my thumbnail along the crease until it was sharp enough to cut skin. I slipped it into my pocket. Tomorrow, I whispered to the empty, expensive house. I go shopping.